I see people already starting to answer polls. We appreciate it. Some of the questions we're asking about is how you use your variable rate planting scripts. Do you use them? Can you get an ROI? And what is kind of holding you back from using variable rate planting more? I'll give a little bit of discussion about this as people are putting it in. Currently, we have the predominance of the people so far, about 70% currently use variable rate planting scripts, but there's still 30 to 40 of the people say they don't use variable rate planting scripts on their clients' growing operations. As we move on to the next question, we ask who is creating the variable rate scripts. A very high percentage, 30%, are personally creating them. And then about 50% use either an independent agronomist, and then a very significant portion, also about 30%, say they use some type of ag retail. So it's a good mix between the independent agronomists, growers personally creating them, or a use of ag retail. And then we ask, we're asking, do you know that you make a positive ROI, which is kind of the core of this webinar today. And about 60% don't know for a fact that they can show a positive ROI, probably why we're on this webinar today. A good 30% are fairly confident that they have a positive ROI, and then there's about 10 to 20% that just don't know. And then we ask, what is holding people back from using variable rate planting more? A very high percentage are still having hardware challenges. About 40% still say that hardware challenges are holding them back. 20% saying they just don't have enough time to do it all. And then there is about 30% saying available knowledge base is holding them back. Definitely a benefit of the webinars like today. And then at least half the people are saying the ability to prove a positive ROI is holding them back. And then kind of the crux of the whole webinar today is, if you could show a positive ROI, would you use it more? And a predominant 70% are saying yes, and 25% are saying, well, maybe. And I mean, that's kind of what we're working on today, is helping people understand how to do that. I'm gonna let this poll go for a little bit longer. We still have probably 30% haven't answered the poll yet, so we'll just keep this going a little bit more. I'm going to explain Zoom. If you've never used Zoom before, just move your mouse around, and you're probably going to have a black bar either at the top or the bottom of your screen. And as you move your mouse around, that'll come up, and that'll tell you, you'll see then a Q&A button. You'll probably see a chat button also. So let's use the chat function if we're just making a general comment as we progress through this webinar. You need a general statement like, hey, you need help with something. But there's also another section for the Q&A, and if you have questions that you specifically want the panelists to answer, then type your questions in there, and at the end of the webinar, we will do our absolute best to get through every one of those Q&As that go into that Q&A section there, and we'll specifically answer it. That's very helpful for us. And as you have questions as we go through it, go ahead and type them in there. We may not answer right away, but we'll hit it as we get to the end of the webinar. So as we sent out the calling for this webinar today, we said some topics that we're going to cover were how to set a variable rate planting script for your field, what data layers should you use to set those planting scripts, how to get insights of your planting scripts, and then we were going to show you some examples of ROI positive planting scripts. And I'm absolutely confident that Carla and Mike will be able to take us through that today, and then we will address those 4 questions as we move into the question and answer section. So with that, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Scott Jackman from Deveron. I run U.S. operations, and we also the sales and marketing effort. Also with us today is Mike Wilson, and I'll hand over to Mike Wilson for introduction of yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Mike Wilson, data collections lead for Deveron UAS, and agronomist with Veritas. Worked in the precision ag industry for almost 18 years now. Validating scripts and creating success for customers has been a real passion of mine from the beginning. Working with the Veritas team has brought us to new levels with the way we can analyze and statistically analyze the data to come up with some results and look for those successes, something that I wasn't able to find elsewhere in the industry at the time. So happy to work with Carla here today throughout this presentation and answer any questions you may have to show kind of the steps we take to do that and help you guys learn more from the scripts you're writing and to make better decisions on the farm as we plant and get into this 2020 season.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And with that, I'll hand it over to Carla. Carla Jackson is going to lead us through the webinar today. And Carla, if you would take over screen, I have stopped sharing and the screen is now yours, Carla. Introduce yourself and let's begin if we can.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. Can you guys see my screen okay? Can you hear me all right?
We can see your screen and hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, good morning and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. I am Carla Jackson. I am the Market Development Agronomist with Veritas here in Chatham in Southwestern Ontario. Today we are going to be, as Scott mentioned and Mike have mentioned, we're going to be discussing variable rate planting prescriptions, what you need to get started, why validate them, and some of the return on investment and analysis that can be provided from the prescriptions. When considering utilizing any Decision Ag solutions, there are 4 areas that you must look at that are important to ensure that the applied methods are working for you. The first one is to identify. We want to identify issues in your field, whether it is nutrient deficiencies through soil sampling, doing research plots, or just your knowledge of the field that certain areas are not growing the same as others. Once you've identified that issue, what do you want to do next? You want to measure. You want to measure those differences with imagery, adjusting your crop plans, or creating management zones to help start tracking the differences so you can improve them effectively. You then want to manage those differences that you have measured by scouting those specific areas, collecting and recording the data for those areas, and by writing prescriptions based on the management zones that you have created. So you can start treating those areas individually with planting prescriptions, fungicide, or fertilizer prescriptions. Finally, you want to validate that you're managing those areas efficiently and effectively. By putting check blocks, or we call them variablocks, in your prescriptions, regardless of what applying, you can analyze the application. You can also create profitability maps that break down your efficiencies and your return on investment in each management zone. They can show you the areas that you need to increase or decrease seed, input costs, etc. to break even. By validating your inputs, you can also start to identify other areas that need adjusting, and you can apply these 4 steps. Many companies today offer 1 or 2 of these steps. Precision ag companies can offer 3 of these steps, but as an industry, we've done a poor job at showing the validation. So the point of today is to show how to better validate your fields and learn from your prescription to make better decisions moving forward. Today, we're going to focus on using planting prescriptions and validating them to choose the optimal planting rate, and also using prescription insights to dive deeper into understanding our varieties and improving our deficient areas. The most popular question that many ask is, how do I get started? Or what data layers do I need to get started? You can work with your agronomist to pull this data together or to see what layers you already have or you don't have to start collecting and how. The data layers that you need to start creating and using planting prescriptions is historic yields or normalized yields. You can use NDVI imagery. You can use soil zones, ones that you have used in more recent years. You can use bare ground imagery. You also need a digital boundary. We'll also need the planter width and the combine width This information is used in the creation of the check blocks. So those are ensured to fit to your equipment and it's easier for your monitor to follow. We'll also need the planner monitor in the tractor. Does it have the ability to control the rate? The make and model are also important to ensure that the prescriptions are created in the proper format that works with your monitor. If you just need basic shape files and we send you a task controller file, those aren't going to communicate. So we want to make sure that you have the right format for your prescription right off the bat so they can start working together quick and easy. We'll also need the AB lines, so the tractor guidance, so we can make sure that the script is lined up with your tractor guidance. So where you start planning is where your prescription will start. Once you've verified that you have some or all of the required layers, then we can start to make the planning prescription. Variable rate prescriptions can be based on yields. At least 3 to 4 years is preferred, but 1 year can be used for growers just starting out. We then can create 3 or 4 crop production zones created based on your yield performance and other characterizing features, like low yield, the medium to low yield, the medium to high yield, and the high yield. Prescriptions can also be created off bare ground imagery, soil zones, or NDVI crop health imagery. Sometimes all are used. You can see on this map, the larger one here, the zones are based off a normalized yield. The top right, the zones are created off a 1-year yield. And the bottom right is a satellite imagery. And you can tell that the soil color and the type is quite indicative of its impact on the yield. Those zones all line up fairly well. Once you choose the most representative image, a prescription can then be created. When making a script, your seeding rate should be discussed with your agronomist. Once you have decided your rates based on your field's variability and variety, they are assigned to corresponding production zones. For instance, if you're planting corn, you'll want to put your higher seeding rates in the high yielding zones. And for soybeans or edible beans, you'll want to put your high seeding rates in the low yielding zones. This is to increase the yield in those low areas, but also to control the white mold risk in those high yielding zones. A lower population equals more plant space equals less disease risk. This field, for example, has a huge variability, and that's why there's a large spread in the seeding rates of 28 to 38,000. If your field doesn't have a large amount of variability, your range in rates can be tighter. It could be 32, 34, 36, 30 to 36, 32 to 38, depending on your soil type and your variability. These are also the standard rates to start out with when trying planting scripts. Knowing the different areas of the field and the varieties you're using is very important. You can also work with your local seed rep to get the optimal seed rates of the varieties that you're planting, and also to find out the varietal response from variable rate to help you get started. Once the rates have been assigned, variablocks or check blocks of higher and lower seeding rates are added to each yield zone for validation after harvest. This process is very important to validate and learn about optimizing your seeding rates to improve the efficiency. Also just wanted to note that it's also possible to add variablocks to any script. So if you want to create your own script, that is great. Like you can create your own zones, you can apply your seeding rates that you want to follow. We can then add the check blocks to your script and then for the final prescription. So you can send any prescription and then we can just add in the variablocks for the analysis at the end of the season. Variablocks or check blocks allow for plot research on the field scale. Check blocks do not require extra work for the grower, especially in the busy season. The monitor does all the work. This allows for the farmer to plant the field in one pass, to combine and harvest in one pass. There's no weigh wagon required or extra work. You get tons of data and analysis to learn from. It takes a little extra work in the winter for planning, but that helps you to ensure that there's less work when it's in the busy season. Variablocks can also provide insights to what the ideal target rate for each yield zone is, your return on investment, and also a variety comparison within the field. Which variety performs best in each production zone and what rate is optimal. Here are two examples of planning prescriptions with variablocks. On the left is a corn script where you can see that the high production zones and rates are within the fields, and the low production and rates are typically headlands in the top of the knolls. This grower planted 31 to 37,000 seeds per acre, so they have 4 production zones. A low and high outlier seeding rate is added so you can compare the lowest actual seeding rate to a rate above and below, and same for the highest actual seeding rate. This is so at the end of the season, you can compare what rate performed the best, and maybe they need to decrease their rates or up them. On the right is a soybean script. The highest production zones are the lowest seeding rates within the field, and the higher seeding rates are on the headlands and knolls. This field has a bit of variability, and their rates range from 145 to 205, with 2 outlier seeding check blocks. You can see that the grid pattern that's overlaid on the field is set to the equipment size, and then we put in the different check blocks in each production zone. This orange zone here, it's the 31,000 seeding rate, and you can see that there's 6 red blocks, which is the 29,000 seeding rate, and there's 6 yellow blocks of the 33,000 seeding rate, all in that same zone. So this forces the equipment to go higher and lower, so you can actually analyze what the optimum rate was for this production zone. We also use your AB lines or your guidance lines to put towards the straightest side of the field, so we can make sure that the script is actually lined up with the area that you're going to start planting first. And you can see that in both examples here. Mike and I will now go through a couple examples of how the process works start to finish. The planting prescription was created based on yield, and this script is for soybeans, so the assigned rates, as discussed with the grower, are placed in the appropriate zones. The variablocks are then placed randomly throughout each production zone. So you can see that the lowest seeding rate outlier check block of 135 was placed throughout the 145 production zone. Once the script is reviewed and approved, the grower will get a PDF copy so they know the total amount of product needed and their target rates. The appropriate format for the script is then exported and loaded to the grower's monitor. When you're planning, please ensure that the right field's prescription is activated and on, and then let the monitor and the rate controller do all the work. The middle map is what the planning as applied map looks like. You can see where the planner increased and decreased the rates throughout the field. The yield map on the right shows the high yielding areas corresponding with the lower rates. We know the zones are correct, but the rates need some adjusting. These 3 layers, the prescription, the as applied, and the harvest maps, are used in the end of season analysis. The value of having check blocks is being able to see what you planted and the profit made. The check blocks compare and show you if you planted a higher or lower seeding rate and what would your ROI be.
So when we look at these graphs here on the page, I would say this is a very good set of an example to use for what you would see likely in your first or second year of trying some variable rate seeding prescriptions. As Carla mentioned, how we set the rates up and how we build the prescriptions is key to being able to produce curves like this and to be able to do the statistical analysis to give us enough data on what the results begin to look like. So the graph in the top left is a typical response we see from a corn hybrid. And the graph we have in the bottom right is what we see kind of in the first year approach with a soybean customer. So generally we see here the 3 or 4 different production zones labeled by color. So in the top left graph, the red line is the low producing areas of the field. Obviously, profit per acre on the left axis shows us that. The mid range is our medium or average producing areas, and that's the yellow color. And our high producing yield areas, our most profitable areas in the field, are represented by the green curve. The solid line in the middle of the curves represents the average of the data or the line of best fit. The shaded area, or the light green or yellow or red areas, represents the spread in the data, or some like to say the confidence interval in the data. So the wider the spread, the thicker the line, the more variability we have, either due to zones or due to variety of performance or whatever have you. It's a little bit of noise in the data, and the less predictable the end result would be of the lines. But nonetheless, when we look at these two graphs, we start to see some really interesting trends that make sense agronomically and really help the customer and the agronomist make some smarter decisions moving forward on this farm. The hashed line or dashed line that goes vertically is the average rate of the planting script, or let's say the average seeding rate the customer would have planted had he done a straight rate application in the field. So right away you can see in the red area on that corn graph, if he would have planted the 34,000 seeds per acre, that is the profit per acre he would have made. By planting less seed, he was actually more profitable. And by the looks of that curve, could have been even more profitable had he planted less yet. When we look at the yellow line, he's fairly close to the top of that curve, and that makes sense agronomically. I mean, the historic average seeding rate for your average field numbers should be pretty close to that most profitable area in the average of that field. And it is showing that that is pretty accurate on that farm. When we go into our high yield zone, the green line, we can see where we would have been at the average seeding rate. And as we move to a higher population, profitability goes up. This script did make the customer some money in this zone, but there's potential to increase seeding rate farther for even more profit. So we learned 2 things, or at least 2 things from this information. We learned that yes, the script was profitable. Yes, the customer made the right decision and that variety did respond. And we also learned that there's potential to maybe push this a little bit farther as we move into other years if data shows the same trend over time. When we look at the soybean map in the bottom right corner, we have the same scenario and the same way of reading the curves, but we get a little different aspect on the end result and the seeding rate that was chosen in the field. So again, if we look at that the vertical dashed line, we see our average seeding rate in that field would have been about 175,000 seeds per acre. When we look at the curves themselves, we see the blue line being our lowest yielding areas with our highest seeding rate. It's the opposite of corn in order to try to promote more vegetation, more seeds per acre, stronger crop growth, so on and so forth. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the red line being our highest yield environment, most profitable area, where we apply the lowest seeding rate because we get naturally good growth, we get excellent germination, risk of disease is higher, so on and so forth. So when we start to analyze this set of curves, we can see that the blue line is actually most profitable right at that 175,000 seeds per acre that the customer planted as his average. And if we think about that in the real world, why do our customers plant 175,000 seeds per acre in a field? It's usually because we want to ensure that that 5 acres in the back corner that's usually tough and under poor conditions just won't come up or won't perform if we don't plant that many seeds. So we wind up sacrificing the profitability across the rest of the farm based on the worst areas of the field. So when we look at this graph, we can see we should have planted 175,000 in that poor yield environment. We should have planted less than that in the green. As we move to the left, we get more profitable. The yellow is showing the same trend. It made us money from the average, but we should have planted less again. and the red line showing the exact same trend also. So what we see on this is, yes, the script made the customer money, but at the end of the day, having planted 25,000 seeds per acre less, still in a variable rate situation, would have made them even more and made them more profitable. Go ahead, Carla. So this is the type of report we can give back to the customer at the end of the season. We do supply that graph that we just reviewed. This is the actual soybean field that we were discussing in that graph, but we also give where the profit was actually made in the field, in the map in that top left corner, and how each zone performed profitably. And we also give some statistic numbers at the bottom. So that script itself made the customer $7.33 compared to what the data is telling us he would have made had he planted that straight rate 175,000 seeds per acre. So the total profit of that field was about $415 over planting it straight rate. And that's by doing nothing different other than doing a little bit of work and setting yourself up ahead of time and planning the monitor. The potential in this field was for just over $17 an acre profit had we had our crystal ball and were able to hit the perfect population, for that growing season with the weather we had. The graphs on the bottom right show what the ideal target rates were, and the variable rate potential revenue that we could have made. So when we think about that set of graphs that we just reviewed, you can see here that the data is telling us that 4 zones probably weren't ideal, 3 zones would have been enough, and that we are correct that the 150,000 seed per acre average seeding rate, reducing each of those zones down by 25,000 seeds per acre would have made us more money and would have made us more profitable at the end of the season, both agronomically and economically. So when we look at this farm customer across his entire operation, 1,100 acres were done with seeding scripts in this year. $7.27 was the average of each and every field, with an $8,000 net profit to the customer's bottom line by literally doing nothing different with his in-field operations. It takes a little bit extra time now to get your script set up, loaded in your monitors, created properly, and then we get to the field. We plant like we've always done from one side to the other. There's no adjusting equipment. There's no changing seeding rates. In the monitor, it's just plant and finish, move on to the next one. Follow it up with the combine at the end of the season, harvest as always, and then submit the data for analysis. It's a real quick and easy way to get some real good analysis and some real good results without a lot of time taken in the field. And you can see by this set of information that we don't always get it right. Either our scripts are wrong based on variety performance, or the zones aren't quite accurate enough, and we need to do a little bit more digging in certain fields. Whatever the reason is, you can see that, in this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or 11 negatives there. But at the end of the day, the average is positive, and it does show a fairly decent return to the variable rate script process.
Thanks, Mike. And here is another example of the planting script to harvest for an edible bean field. This field zones were created based on normalized yield. This customer also created these zones for soil sampling, and now they're using the same zones for planting and their fungicide applications, variable rate planting and fungicide applications. You can see from the script to the planting as applied, the grower hit the target rates pretty well. And then when you look at the harvest map on the right, how close the yield zones correlate with the zones created from the normalized yield. The prescription is starting to even out the yield in the middle productivity zones, and the headlands are still the lowest yielding zone. These results are from 2019, and based on the season we had around here, wet spring, droughty summer, the planting rates could have been reduced to attain a higher ROI.
Yeah, that's right, Carla. As you can see by this graph, the first and most obvious thing that jumps off the page to us here is we should have planted less in every zone. The trend is up and to the left, meaning more profitable at the lower seeding rates. Now, 2019 was a unique year, and maybe we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket and take this approach across the entire operation next year, but it is a good case of learning and a good thing to see if we see the trend repeat. We have done lots of work in edible beans over the last 5 to 10 years, and we do see the trend of reducing seeding costs being more profitable. But the trick is now to identify what is the optimum seeding rate in those zones in your field, and how do we get to that and make sure we are hitting the nail on the head. So you can see here, this customer's average seeding rate was about 102 to 103,000 seeds per acre. You can see the two lower yielding areas with the higher seeding rates actually cost a little bit of money in this script. The red line definitely was a loss. The script hurt him. He would have been better planning at that lower seeding rate. The yellow line also was a bit of a loss, not much. Luckily, those two areas in the field were small, and because most of the field was in the higher yielding area, the script was still profitable. But you can see how the green line made money and could have made a little bit more had he gone further left. And the blue line definitely made some money, and arguably he's probably getting close to that low end number. You can see how the bottom of that curve starts to dip down a little bit in the shaded area. So we're getting close to finding out where that optimum level is. So we need to start being careful and then watch that as years start to come. Here are the results, again, with the deliverable to the customer at the end. As I said, most of the zones in this field were the green and the light yellow, the high yield environment, as you can see by the map there. And so that made the script quite profitable. And he was able to make $34 an acre with this variable rate edible bean seeding script. Edible beans do respond very well to variable rate populations, and we see great results as we move forward. Again, if we look at that map on the bottom right with the ideal target rate, that shows us where the top of each curve was and what rate would have brought the most profit based on the information on the graph. So to calculate that ideal target rate, we look at those curves that we see in that graph on the top, and we see where the line is highest, what the seeding rate would have been to bring the most return to the customer in each zone, and we extrapolate that out across the original prescription zones to give a map showing what the ideal seeding rate would have been based on the information we received from the analysis. So when we look at typical analysis of the four fields that a customer did with edible beans in this past growing season, again, we can see the average profit across the farm from the seeding scripts that were created in this past season. We have roughly 3 wins, 1 loss. You can see the analysis there on the bottom, the 288 acres with the 618 average profit, with just under $1,800 net profit to the customer, using the data to his advantage and using some information to make some better decisions moving into the 2020 season.
Great, thanks, Mike. And to go along with those optimal target rates and the best ROI, other Veriblock insights can look at the different varieties in the field. Now, this is an example from a seed company where they're trying to find out how each of their varieties perform in different production zones, which variety yielded the best, but also looking at the optimal seeding rate of each one. First graph is a box plot of how the varieties yielded by production zone. The bottom table breaks down each variety and how it yielded in each zone and what the optimal rate was. Variablocks can also tell you what the yield was at the optimal population for that year because it was tested. There are many more examples of insights that checkblocks can provide, but these are just some of the more popular examples for planting validation. And hopefully we'll have another webinar that just goes a little more in depth on the analysis piece in the future here. So remember the 4 steps from the beginning. Identify the problem and use existing technology to improve it. Measure the differences. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. We have the ability to measure every pass of the field. Manage and validate your applications. Field-specific data paired with strong analytics provides the so what answers and the proof we need to remove some of that emotion. Prescriptions with check blocks help verify the application's ROI and to determine the appropriate rate. Prescriptions can also help organizations and growers be more 4R compliant. So talk with your agronomist today to see what data you need to start collecting so you can provide measurable results to your farm. Thank you. And we'll open up for questions.
Hey, Carla, thank you. And Carla, actually, if you could just keep presenting, and then I will ask you to jump to specific slides if we get there. I'm going to work through the Q&A session here. As you guys listened to Carla and Mike talk through, we said we were going to talk about how to set a planning script for your field. We talked about the data layers that we use and that we recommend that you use if you have your own methods for setting those planning scripts. And then we talked about how several ways to get planning script ROIs. Get insights into your planning scripts. And then we talked about some ROI positive, and actually we had a couple negative in there. You know, it doesn't always work. Mother Nature is sometimes fickle. So we do our best to minimize that. We've got several questions and we're going to go through them right now. I've got 3 questions in the chat section, and I'm going to clear the questions in the chat section first. And if you have questions going forward, if you could try to get them in the Q&A session, we'll absolutely get over there and work through those. So Mike and Carla, you just determine who's going to answer these. First question is in the chat section, do we think that the yield map has good accuracy for building our variable rate planting scripts? Again, how do we think the yield map has good enough accuracy to build a planting script for next year?
Yeah, sure. That is a yes and no is the answer to that question. And I would say that depends on the yield map that you or your agronomist has chosen to use. Yield data can skew information and provide false things at times. So, you know, the more knowledge we have of the field, the more information we have telling us the stability of a zone, the better we have. Yield is the most important data layer in making that decision, but it doesn't always need to be the only one. When we start using multiple years worth of yield, we start to see the trends really unearth themselves. When we start adding in elevation, soil type, and some other types of zone layers like that, then it really becomes clear and we get a very accurate decision. Crops like soybeans, where your high yielding areas that get affected by disease like white mold or something that can be detrimental to yield, is a perfect example of how yield data can be skewed and maybe make the results not quite accurate when looking forward. But knowing that and using some corn yield maps and some elevation data and some other things like that really help to clear those issues up. So 1 year's worth of yield, if it's the right yield and the customer agrees with it and the agronomist understands that it did have everything going for it, can be used. But ultimately, yes, be careful, and 2, 3, the more years worth, the better. Obviously, that's where we get a normalized yield map like this, showing us the trends over time, and then the ability to start making predictions on how that field's going to perform.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I've got 2 more questions on the chat section, and they generally all deal with setting that yield rate. So I'm going to ask both of these questions, and then Mike and Carla, if you could broadly talk about your response here, kind of incorporate your answers to both of these. The next question is, well, the next 2 questions are, how do you set the ideal rate? So how do you get that number from your recommendations? And then right in line with that is, how do you determine the range of those zones? So for example, the map you have up here, you have a seeding rate of 28,000, 31,000, 34,000, 38,000. What methods did you guys use to, number one, set that rate? And number two, what are your recommendations are for creating the variation in zone, variation in rates?
Sure. So that is determined usually by specific knowledge within the area. If we have seed representatives that know how the varieties perform and what population range it typically performs best in, that's very, very useful information out of the gate. If we're working with a new customer that does not have a lot of data or is unsure, usually we use their average seeding rate as a place to start, because that's usually what's worked best for them in the past. And then we'll go up and down from there, and we use the data learned from the analysis to tweak, educate ourselves and the grower, and build stronger decisions as we move forward. How do we know how far the spread should be in a seeding script? Basically comes with the experience of the ground and looking at the amount of variability present within the field. If your yield monitor is consistently only swinging a very small percentage from one side of the field to the other, then there isn't the need to put 4 or more zones in that field, and there isn't the need to put 4 or 5 different seeding rates in that field. If the field's fairly flat and even, then 2 or 3 seeding rates is probably ideal. But if you get a field like this one on the screen, where you've got yield swings from 100 to 300 bushels per acre of corn, and there's everything from clay to gravel across the farm, then yes, experimenting with that seed and pushing the envelope a little bit really does begin to pay, and really does show some advantages out of the end. So it's a little bit of learning curve in year 1 and 2, but once you start to understand the process and how the populations can affect the end yield, then you can start to hone in and make better decisions across the entire operation and other operations within the same area.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. We have now, moving over to the Q&A session, we have at least 7 more questions here. We've got about 15 more minutes on the webinar, so we're going to do our absolute best to get through all these questions. If you have more questions, by all means, put them in there. And if we can't get you in the remaining 15 minutes, we'll send you an email response on our answers for that. So first question in the Q&A section is, this individual has seen research that indicates that with soybeans and wheat, that a 20 to 25% seeding rate variation is required to see significant yield changes. What are your thoughts about that? Are you seeing that also as you set the rates?
Yeah, I think that's, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think that will tend to change based on the different areas of the world that the prescriptions are planted in. Carla, if you go to the soybean script there, you'll see that, if we look at the minimum seeding rate there of 145,000 seeds per acre, if we add 40% to that number, I think it comes out to about 203,000. So, in that script there, we're actually changing seeding rate by 40%. Yeah, I don't think you need to do 20% with every jump, but I think you want to probably see, a decent change in overall seeding rate to see a response from one side of the field to the other. And again, the amount that we push that rate change and the number of rate changes or zones in a field definitely needs to depend on the variability that you're seeing in that field, and if ultimately if you're seeing a response from the change itself.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The next question is a little bit longer, but try to bear with me as I ask it and then see if we can address. The question is, in soybeans, the low yielding areas are likely to be in those areas of poor soil quality. So therefore, the questionnaire says you probably should plant a higher density of plants in those areas. And so now get to the crux of the question: how are those plants how are those plants in terms of similarity across the rest of the field affecting? So is the issue normally poor soil masks higher seeding rate, or what are your thoughts about that?
Well, very good question. And yes, that is something that we look at and try to watch. And I think that is the main reason for continuing this process on as we go and learn and as we try to fix and change fields. So you hit the nail right on the head. It is those poor soil quality areas that do require the higher seeding rates to, one, get proper emergence, to two, promote growth and some competition there in the row to get the bean to grow taller, faster, shade the ground sooner to help combat weed pressures, so on and so forth. Just typically those lower areas don't promote a thick vegetative crop in soybeans or edible beans. So increasing populations helps us with that and helps to get more pods per acre in general. And as you say, vice versa, that low, rich, high-yielding ground is naturally very vegetative. The crop grows rank and healthy. Higher populations usually cause lodging, increase in disease, and things like that. So that's where the variable rate population can help with disease pressure in those areas and help with weed management and weed pressures in the lower yielding areas. So as we begin to work on a field holistically and we start improving soil quality in those poor performing areas, if it's something we can manage, sometimes it's not, then, the scripts may potentially change over time. As we begin to increase yield in those areas, then we can start ratcheting back seeding rate and start making adjustment. As far as crop quality and things like that go and staging, really haven't seen a big difference on, harvestability or staging differences in the crop. Usually those tougher areas are the ones that die down or mature faster anyways, so a thicker seeding rate isn't usually an issue. If anything, we see probably better harvestability by reducing the seeding rate in the better areas to reduce lodging and reduce the amount of disease, making quality go up and the harvestability easier and better. So definitely a great question, and there's a lot going on in that question and a lot of other things to measure. Seeding rate alone is not going to fix the problem. It's more of a way to manage the current problem and work through it to identify some other agronomic issues that you want to focus on the farm and tackle to get things moving along better.
And so thanks, Mike, for leading right into that. Then managing a lot of variabilities. How do we, if we combine a variable rate seeding along with fertilizer, along with fungicide scripts in one field, how do we isolate the response for VR seeding?
Yeah, great question, and something that we're working at to do the multivariance analysis and things like that across different scripts. And the short answer is very difficultly. So when we're talking about the variable rate fertilizers and things like that, we recommend that the customer use the same or very, very similar zones to that of the planting script and begin to fertilize, based on soil levels and crop removal levels across the field, so that most of the entire zone being treated is treated with a very similar rate of fertilizer. Fertilizer itself, is pretty much proven. We know crop removal rates, we know how we need to build the soil, so on and so forth. We don't typically do blocks on large scale fertilizer like P and K and things like that. We can. It just soil's a difficult thing to build, and it takes time. 5 to 10 years to fix major issues depending on how bad they are. So a block in 1 year might show you something, but ultimately not everything. But when we start looking at that fungicide, nitrogen, seeding scripts and things like that, then yes, a small field with lots of zones, like some of these we've shown, it becomes very difficult. And our recommendation would be just do one thing at a time. Learn what works one field at a time. And once you've proven it to yourself and know the response, then you can start doubling and adding multiple approaches to a single field. If you're lucky enough to have large acres, 100-acre fields plus, where the variability is large enough that you can put enough blocks in to do 2 different treatments at the same time, then wonderful. I mean, those are fun fields to work with and we enjoy that. But we need to make sure that we do not overlap a fungicide script block with a seeding script block, and we're able to dissect the data at the end of the season properly so that we can analyze both script individually and give you the results in total. But that is a field by field specific situation, and needs to be treated at a one-on-one level of that. But great question. Yes, when we start to manage multiple things at a time, it can get cloudy if the proper steps aren't taken.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So right in line with that, you may have already answered that, but this question is these examples that you used here, were these isolated examples, or was there other variables going in there? And they specifically asked, was there variable rate fertilizer scripts on these fields that we use as examples, or were these isolated fields?
So the field on the screen now, no, there has not been variable rate fertilizer done with this customer yet, although he is seeing enough variability that is his next step, and he's working towards that very quickly because he's identified there is a lot of variability on the farms and he wants to start managing it differently. The first edible bean example we showed, this field here, this customer has been doing actually began and started with soil sampling and has variable rate fertilizer on this farm for many years, probably 10 plus. And these zones that we use for this planting script are actually the same soil zones that they created with their agronomist using normalized yield, and they're the same zones that they use for variable rating the fertilizer. So lots of data with this customer, lots of information going on the farms, and you can see here by the stability of the zones year in, year out, and the way the field behaves that they're getting it dialed in very well, and the results are quite positive for this operation.
Yeah, next question. Can this technology, can this methodology or way of thinking work on silage? Can we verify corn silage?
Without a yield monitor, it becomes very difficult. That's the piece we use to do the ultimate validation and get us the hard numbers to prove success or not at the end of the year. But I'm not going to say it's impossible. If you're a customer that has a harvest lab or some sort of a yield monitor system on the silage machine, that becomes a little bit easier. I mean, we're now starting to get some yield data, and it's potential that we could have some success there. But without that hard number, it is a challenge. I mean, the concept would work absolutely. There's no reason why silage wouldn't benefit from it as well, but to get that ROI, it becomes difficult. There is potential to possibly use an NDVI image and extrapolate some yield values out, especially if there's a part of the field left that is combined that we can do to validate and I guess correlate the NDVI image back to a yield, and you could extrapolate, but like I said, it becomes very difficult, and I would say yield is probably necessary to guarantee good results out of the gate.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. How do we determine the number of check blocks we use?
So our rule of thumb is the more the better without sacrificing the integrity of the script. We like to try to get at least 5 blocks of each seeding rate, higher and lower in each zone. Sometimes the fields just don't allow it. I mean, the picture Carla has here on screen now is perfect. I mean, you can see we definitely have more than 5 red and yellow seeding blocks in that orange zone for sure in that field. We're going to get lots of data, lots of stability. But when we start to get into those green headlands area, I think there's still 4 or 5, but it gets tougher to put the blocks in and get some data out of it. So, and then if you look at that field to the north, it's such a small field, it's hard to get a lot of data out of it. So depending, equipment size changes how big our blocks are, obviously, and the amount of variability within a field and field size are all things that start to determine that. But for good statistical analysis, we want as many data points as possible, and we want to try to get as many blocks in as possible without ruining the script and without creating something that the planter can't physically plant, i.e. rate changes happening so fast that the controller and the monitor can't adjust fast enough, and creating frustration for the customer and the operator in the field.
That's one thing I just want to add to that too, Mike, is that we can adjust the blocks to, like, there is a difference in hitting your target rates with hydraulic and electric drives. So we can adjust the blocks to make them a little longer to allow for that adjustment, just so you have a better opportunity to hit those target rates. So we can work with the grower to adjust the blocks to work with their equipment too.
So right in line with that, then the next question is how do we validate the planting rates? Are we validating them by using the as applied data later, or do we ask that they or their agronomist ground truth what planted, or a combination of both, or yes?
Yeah, I mean, a ground truth is always wonderful. It's not needed for the analysis we do, but I think it's a great step for the agronomist to do with the grower, to ensure satisfaction of the script, and better understand the field conditions and make sure they are seeing what they expected across the field. But to do the analysis, yes, it's that as applied data compared to the yield map at the end of the year that's allowing us to do the analysis. We want the as applied data so that we can see exactly what happened in the field with the planter. Was the script shut off in places? Was there some straight rate strips done from one end of the field to the other? Did they plant earlier? Did they plant late? And did they use the script multiplier in the cab and bump seeding rates up or down? Whatever potentially has the ability to change in season, we want measured. So that as applied map gives us that detail and allows us to dissect what's happening. It also allows us to see more data points in the field. As that planter ramps up and ramps down, it actually begins to give us, other seeding rates and other things to look at, and see how the yield performed, when we dissect it at that really intense level.
Yeah, and then right in line with that is if we have a late planting season, so we did all the work over the winter, and then we have a late season, are we able to adjust those scripts and those planting rates with the agronomist or grower?
Yes, absolutely. We prefer that the grower and the agronomist work with us and tell us. The way that our analysis tool works, the analysis will work and you will get results back beautifully. But when we look at those vertical lines we were showing on the graph, Carl, if you can go to one of those examples, let's say the soybean chart or soybean graph. Yeah, that one. So, if we're looking for the average seeding rate to be 175,000 and we have those target rate dots on the page of each individual target, obviously if you use the script multiplier in the cab, that changes the results, and the way the computer does the analysis at the end of the season will throw it off and give some skewed numbers. So knowing how you change that the script and whether you increased or decreased it allows us to tweak that before we do the analysis to give you the most accurate results. Nonetheless, you will still get a set of curves and you will still see the trends, and it will still give you some answers. But yes, definitely can be changed and modified as the season changes. That's very important.
Yeah, great. And we've still got 3 questions, and we're going to do our best to get through these. Hopefully we don't get kicked off here. Next question is do we have any data for best management practices for other crops, such as canolas or cereals? Have we applied this methodology to things other than beans and corn?
A little bit, yes. Corn, soybeans, and edible beans are the major three we've done. That's where most of our data lies today. We'd love to start working in the other crops to build a database and help other customers learn. The process would be identical. In wheat and cereals, we tend to see the similar trend where you want to increase seeding rates in those poorer growing environments, typically because we want to promote tillering and promote more heads per acre and those lower, that lower unproductive soils. And then obviously in that really high producing areas where we get tons of tillering naturally, lots of heads per acre. I think I know that's the areas where we want to, look at potentially decreasing seeding rates. And then, ultimately the nitrogen management program on top of that becomes critical to ensure that we are feeding the crop properly and timely, and to promote that tillering and get the proper amount of plants and heads per acre we need. We've done a small amount of work in the cereal market, and those are the trends we're starting to see out of the gate. The canola piece and some of those other crops we have not as of yet, but definitely would be interested in working with customers on that and learning and identifying the key factors as we move out.
Yeah, next question is the profit numbers that we showed, so the examples that we showed, and then we had a profit number in there. Do those numbers include fixed costs and variable costs? Like what is that number? Or is that solely based on reaction to increase and decrease in seeding?
Yeah, that's just the reaction to seed. So those numbers on profit on the charts are just your profit per acre from the seeding operation alone. And these numbers that we're seeing there are just the increase in profit or decrease in profit with the seed cost and the cost of the prescription taken off. So all other costs in the operation, fertilizer, chemical, land rent, all those other fixed costs are not added in the calculation, simply because that would be next to impossible. There's too much information to get, and every field and every operation is so drastically different, it's hard. So this is just taking into consideration the price of the seed, the cost of the prescription, and the net impact the prescription has on that seeding operation.
And then leading right into profitability. This next question is, lower seeding rates may be profitable in a year, but does that balance out with good agronomy? Is it what is lower seeding rate overcome by agronomy? And this questionnaire is specifically thinking about, does a lower seeding rate affect weed competition and maturity? Like, what's your thoughts on that interaction?
Sure, absolutely. And I think good agronomy is key to this whole process. Without good agronomy, none of this works. We want to change seeding rate based on the agronomic practices we know on the farm. We want to make sure, what we do on a sandy farm, seeding wise, is very different than we do on a clay farm. So why are we not treating a field specifically based on those same soil types? The sandy areas on a farm get seeding rate A, and the clay areas on a farm get seeding rate B. So the thought process and the goal is to identify the zones properly, so we are managing those soil types accordingly, and we are applying that good agronomy to each of those zones properly, so that we get the best result. And we know when we are agronomically correct, we are usually most economically correct too. Not every time, but I would say 99% of the time in most cases. When we start looking at weed pressures and things like that, usually it's a non-issue. We're not cutting seed back enough that's going to affect sunlight and the shading of the ground and competition. If anything, I think we probably get an increased benefit in weed control and shading of the ground by increasing and getting canopy closure earlier on those tougher areas and trying to preserve moisture and some of those other good benefits that happen. So we try to adjust our seeding rates accordingly based on the agronomy that we know on a farm, and ultimately based on what these curves are telling us and what the results show us over time.
Excellent. And And to close out our questions, and we did go a little bit long, but we see probably 3/4 of the people are still engaged. So Mike and Carla is giving good responses. This last question may be a philosophical question, I'm not sure. But I'm assuming they don't mean throw money at it. So if you have good ground that has a tendency to drown out, and I mean by, throw money at it, right? Put in some tiles, and I'm assuming they're not saying, let's not go that way. Those areas are typically red in your yield monitor because they drown out, but they're actually really good ground. So what's your recommendation for setting a seeding rate there? Great ground that drowns out on a higher than average.
Sure. So, I mean, that starts to become more of a customer specific and zone specific goal. And something, when we start looking at that normalized yield map, those start to become our unstable areas. Those areas of unstable yield where they yield like a bugger on a great year and they drowned out, or on a wet year, or they burn off and dry up completely on a droughty year, thinking of an oil type situation. Those unstable zones become very challenging to write scripts for. Not impossible, and not, it's definitely something we need to manage, but understanding that instability of those zones and why it occurs really starts to drive the success of your scripts and how you make them profitable. So a very good point. I would start to ask questions of the customer and find out what their comfort level is in those zones, and maybe start to specify those certain areas that drowned out differently. Ultimately, it is the best yielding area on the farm, and if we don't get a situation where it drowns out, you're going to want your seeding rate to get the best bang for your dollar. On the flip side, when it does drown out, we'll want the seed there because it's just an added expense. So maybe in those unstable areas, or the areas that are like that, you just move back to that average seeding rate or that middle zone, so that you're not putting yourself at risk in both directions. It's the best bang for your dollar. There's enough seed there to give you a decent yield when you get it, and you're not breaking the bank with a ton of seed on the years it floods out. So different areas of the field, and those are things where the one-on-one approach and
Yeah, great. Appreciate the response there, Mike. I would like to, we have been able to get through all the questions, and we greatly appreciate everybody who typed in your questions and asked. I'd like to thank Mike and Carla for leading us through this webinar today, and most definitely would like to thank all of the attendees who joined us. You are why we're here, and our whole goal for these webinars is to help increase adoption rate of precision ag tools and technology, and start to understand how to use data to get a positive ROI. I mean, that was the crux of this webinar today, was how to get a positive ROI for your planting script. So again, we appreciate everybody joining us. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everybody who joined, and you feel free to share that with your peers or whatever, if you think this is valuable. And if you'd like to have more webinars like this, I mean, we are all about increasing the adoption rate of precision ag tools, then please email us and tell us what your preferred topic may be. And if it fits in something we can do, we will absolutely queue that up for a webinar. We again appreciate it. And with that, we're going to end the webinar and look forward to catching everybody the next time.